good morning. Welcome to the Tree Planners podcast. And we are joined by Margaret, as always, and by Claire this morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Morning.
And in case you don't know, Claire is a longtime executive director of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, and she is stepping down. And so we're kind of like, I don't know, talking about that experience. The Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, also, you were sort of started it. You were there at the start of it. No?
No, but I'll tell a little story, which I
Okay.
think is one of the more inspiring little stories. When I was, 25, 26, I started looking at the lake at Innisfil and Cooks Bay, where my family has cottaged since 1889. And I was like, I don't really understand what's going on at this lake. What's happening? Can I find any information? There wasn't a whole lot, but there was some on the early internet. And I created a program which I ran with the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority called Paddling Around Lake Simcoe. And we did a lot of education and funny skits. And we met some people in Georgina. There was the Alliance for Better Georgina, and Annabelle Slate and Bob Eisenberg were two of the people who were part of that group. They're both, sort of 30 years older than me-ish. And they were both just incredible leaders in their own right. So we had this experience of paddling on the Masconange River together, and some of the members, including Annabelle and Jane Meredith, were like, what? This river is totally choked with duckweed. This is a huge problem. Oh, I just realized this is a lake-wide problem, and maybe we should apply ourselves to trying to fix this. So they actually went off and created the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition after our Paddling Around Lake Simcoe tour. I went back to BC to my boyfriend at the time and spent another year or so there before that ended. And I just got pulled back to Ontario. I mean, actually, Lake Simcoe pulled me back to Ontario. I just kind of got hooked. I was like, that was a great experience, and came back to Ontario, and then reached out to Annabelle and realized that they had started the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition in 2003, the year after my Paddling Around Lake Simcoe project.
2003. Okay.
Hmm.
Huh. We were, before hitting the go live button here, we were talking about parenting, and so I was going to use that as an entry point here. I guess it's a little bit cumbersome, but
You can
anyways.
pretend. I'm like
Yeah.
one of the coalition's mothers for sure.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I think also just, for those people that are watching and they say, man, I have so much to do, job, everything else. And I think that it's worth noting that the people that do this work are parenting like their organization as well as their parents on the side for the most part. And it's quite a interesting blend of things. I know both of us have brought our kids to events and protests. I know Adam has done that too with some of this stuff, but for the climate change. So it's like a different way of growing up in a way of when you've got kids in a small grassroots organization, for sure.
Yeah. I think it's been it's always kind of refreshing to ask the kids, what did you understand? What did you learn? What did you like? What did you not like? What was boring? They'll always tell you what's boring. Adults talking about politics, but actually my youngest now, who's 10, doesn't love school, but his teacher's like, he is so engaged in politics. Oh my gosh, we had that school election, and he was a scrutineer, and it was on and on. So, I mean, it is neat to bring them into it. The other thing that I think my kids reflect back to me is actually how powerful the First Nations way of talking about all of this stuff is. Like, they hear them, they hear the stories, they hear the way that they talk, and they kind of reflect that back to which I think is not surprising, but noteworthy, We're very good storytellers. This is how you engage people at a young age. You don't go blah blah blah. Bill 5, you
Mm-hmm.
know, King of Therma, minister of blah blah blah. It's like maybe that's later, but actually the principles of parenting, the principles of being a good person, of carrying something, stewarding, taking care, like those messages, I think are really powerful in most First Nations speakers I've heard, and just their way of talking about water and the issues that we work on.
I think it's something Adam and I talk about a lot is about the power of storytelling, and Adam does that really well with the apps. Forgot a letter there, maps. And we were at an event last night actually, and for Pollinate Berry, Living Green Pollinate Berry event, and Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition was there too, but it was Jessica that was there. And people came and saw the maps and are like, "That's really cool!" Like just for people to be able to engage in a story that's involving landscapes in a different way that they hadn't thought. So my question is like, what would the story you would want people to know about Lake Simcoe?
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of cool about Lake Simcoe is its history, right? Its name. It's like shining waters, beautiful waters, the jewel of Ontario. Like these are the names that both native and settler folks have applied to the lake. It connotes a whole lot of love and reverence. And again, not to tap into too much to the First Nations stuff, but again, like we're water protectors. We have to be water protectors because the water can't protect itself. So it really is up to us to ask questions, and I think challenge some decisions. And I think in our personal lives, of course, do the things that you should do. Like don't use fertilizer on your lawn like you really don't need it and it pollutes the lake. Don't waste water, all these things. But don't get too obsessed with all the little individual things you can do. You have to you got to look up. I mean, I have a lot of concerns about where Ontario is going, policy wise and government wise. And we can't ignore that because we can't take care of Lake Simcoe without government being transparent and helpful and effective and reporting and striving for better.
Can we also back up maybe a little bit to when you were in BC, and what you mentioned that like Lake Simcoe was one of the things that drew you back here. What was that? And and then like is that attached to the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition sort of explicitly, or was there another step that was
Not,
taken?
not exactly. I mean, I was I wanted to work
Oh,
on.
and sorry. One more thing. So I spent some time in BC as well, and the sort of grassroots organizing scene in BC is quite strong. So were you also part of that out there, and did that then bridge here?
Yeah. So I guess there's kind of two parts of the story. One is that I love Lake Simcoe and I always will. My family will always cottage there. I lived there for 4 years in Innisfil. Kids went to school there and everything. So, I'm always going to love it. But then also, I was at a stage in my life where I had some work experience as an environmental educator. I'd worked for the Sierra Club in BC, and I worked for a really cool think tank called the Center for Integral Economics. It was like working on tax shifting for social justice and environmental causes. And I was applying for jobs. The place is lousy with environmentalists. Like, hello, Ontarians that live in BC, come back, come back. Like, the place is full. I mean, it's great for BC, but it's not great for Ontario.
Hmm.
And I thought, actually, who's working on Lake Simcoe? Like, who's going to do this? And maybe there's a place for me. I was getting jobs in BC, but it was like, I got one of three positions, 300 people applied for to get minimum wage to travel around BC to be an educator, which was an awesome experience as a unattached person with no kids and everything. But I was like, I don't know how am I going to be able to work here. But I love Ontario. I'm from Ontario and I really care. I kept coming back, every Christmas or whatever. And I was like, what has happened? Like you drive up the 400 and it was like these suburbs were just sprouting up like mushrooms. And I was pretty sure, without knowing much about planning, that this was not going to be great for communities or affordability or the environment. And so those interests started to kind of come together like, yeah, what is actually happening and how can I learn more about it? My work in BC I was a canoe tripping and sea kayaking guide. So for me, doing the paddling around Lake Simcoe project was a way to bridge what I had been doing with what I wanted to do. And in the course of that, I met all sorts of great people that were doing work, but there wasn't really much of a voice for Lake Simcoe. So that really was what the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition was set up to do, was to be more of a citizen voice, to have some smart people sit around the table and look at the information that was being created and ask questions, challenge some of the presentation of information, and then ultimately to really ask for more, to say, oh, well, you've just approved this, you've just approved that. Like, if we keep going the way we're going, this ecosystem will be devastated. So that was kind of the lead up to the big campaign to get the Lake Simcoe Protection Act.
Mm-hmm. And I think too that I might be skipping all over the place here, but what else is new? You guys work with me enough to know that I don't follow chronology. I think the hard part with the Lake Simcoe, like it was great that you guys got the plan and you've been working on trying to keep that plan. But Lake Simcoe has become this political tool that everybody like wraps themselves in the I love Lake Simcoe and we have the Lake Simcoe and the politicians just they know that it's something that can get them some sort of credibility without actually having to do anything. And I think when I talk to people, and I'm curious what your experience is, when I talk to people about Lake Simcoe, they feel um, supported by the politicians saying how much they love Lake Simcoe. And they just assume that that means that they're taking care of it because we want the government to put in the Lake Simcoe cleanup fund. We want to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to build a phosphorus plant. Like these are all the things that the lake needs because the politicians tell us so. And then, as I know, we've been working with you closely, it feels very much like, well, that's not actually how it goes. So I think the public kind of gets lulled into this false sense of security because it's used as this political tool to get votes, but then the commitment and follow through isn't really there. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. I actually have noticed a bit less of that in recent times. Like, I don't think they are wrapping themselves in I love Lake Simcoe so much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know really why. If it's just because they're like, well, look, we just had this provincial election in February that nobody really quite knew about or understood why we were doing it. So, like, we'll just throw together. I mean, honestly, their platform came out like, what was it, a week before the vote or something? Like, I mean, I don't know what any of those conservative MPPs were saying they really stood for, except Captain Canada, which is code for let's remove all the guardrails and mine and drill, baby, drill. So I mean, for me, like, yeah, this is enormously frustrating. We have been in good faith sending letters, trying to set up meetings, started off well. And then within like a couple months, the doors were slammed shut. This government basically does not talk to environmentalists. So, we've been trying to call it out. And I would say with limited success. So there are, I think, a few factors that are part of this. I mean, of course, Lake Simcoe, it doesn't exist in a bubble. It is subject to all the same societal forces. And so during my tenure as executive director, so just the last 7 years, the media landscape around Lake Simcoe has absolutely crumbled. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think there are a few print papers left. Almost none of them are independent. There's still quite a lot of great journalists, but a lot of journalists are out of work. I heard people just I check Alcona chats on Facebook all the time. Margaret's like, oh,
Dangerous.
there with your stop telling us how much you look at Alcona chats. But I think it's actually kind of a helpful thing for like, what do people care about and talk about and listen to and need to know?
Mhm.
Um, and oh, I just lost my train of thought. What was that? So whatever.
The
Media landscape.
crumbling
Oh
of
yeah,
the
yeah. Sorry, that it was. Hey, what happened? Why are all of our daycare centers not taking as many children in the fall? Stressed out mom here. I don't know where I'm going to send my child for daycare. This doesn't have anything to do with Lake Simcoe, but like, oh, well, that who and a question: what level of government is responsible for this?
Mhm.
So people are getting information through Facebook, and you can't share news on Facebook anymore. Is another dagger. I tried to share a CBC article that explained this, and I was like, oh yeah, right, I can't share information. So I wrote like, well, you have to support your paper, like subscribe. I $5 a month. I do it for the digital media around Lake Simcoe.
Mhm.
So the media picks up what we write all the time, but if not a lot of people are reading the media, it's hard to reach them. People are on tons of different platforms. I mean, if all you want to look at all day is pictures of birds on social media, you can do that. So if people don't want to know, like what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I think I just want to point out one little thing before I'm sure Adam has a comment there, but the when you said environmentalists, the one thing that really bothers me about how that's being used, and as you know, the premier just said maybe a couple of weeks ago about the radical environmentalists. Most of the environmentalists we work with, our work, your work, is based on science. This is based on evidence. It's not just weirdo wacko people that have these ideas that they pulled out of thin air. Like, you know, you both have environmental studies background, you're a planner. Like, we're talking about very intelligent, well educated people who are using international science, university, like all of these sort of things. So it's kind of this weird thing now where when you're saying the government isn't talking to environmentalists, I want people to know it's not just the groups like ours, although very clearly based in evidence and science. It's actually scientists. Those are the people that are not within their government. They're not listening to them either. So it's not just environmentalists. Environmentalists encompasses a whole bunch of people who are educated, who know the issues, who have the evidence and science to back up why they're concerned. And this government seems to be immune from that. They have a little echo chamber, and that's the way they like it. And some of their base, I would say, actually appreciates that they don't talk to environmentalists because they've gotten this idea that we're radical, that we're really just talking out against progress. It's a really kind of toxic binary that's been set up for sure.
So you are preempting one of the topics that I was planning on getting to later on.
Sorry.
That's all right. We're going to arrive at the current political landscape, which is an interesting conversation. But I mean, so I have something that I want to bring up that that transition from BC to Ontario made me think about, which maybe goes a little bit to this political landscape as well. But then there's also kind of commonalities between BC and Ontario in terms of at least from the top down approach towards the environment. But the bottom up approach I find is interesting in some of the differences there. So like with like like the sort of the richness of, for lack of a better term, of environmental activism in BC. At least from when I was there, it sounds like you had a similar experience as well. And I wouldn't say that Ontario doesn't have a wealth of resources in that regard. I mean, there's plenty of large environmental organizations and plenty of environmental organizing happening in Ontario, but it does seem to have just a different sort of vibe. And I wonder, I just thought it was interesting to think about the different landscapes as well and how that sort of factors into our sense of of space and
Mhm.
place and our connection to it and our willingness to do something to it. In Ontario, like, and certainly kind of in our area in the Lake Simcoe GTA area, it there aren't a lot of natural features that kind of put you into that sense of the sublime, that sense of being part of something much larger than yourself, which is like hard to escape in BC. That's like everywhere. Uh,
Yes, sure.
the grandeur of nature's in your face there, and it really kind of puts you in your place.
Yeah.
And I found that notion kind of interesting, and the question of whether, like, if there's something about Ontario's natural features, at least sort of, I mean, Ontario is huge, so there's lots of different natural features, but we're just kind of looking in the central Ontario area, maybe southern
Yeah.
Ontario area. But if there's something about our the character of our nature here that kind of asks us to engage with it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a good characterization. I think when the beauty of nature just smacks you in the face, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I love this. This is so stimulating." As a paddler, like being on the ocean and feeling that swell that's just persistent. It's always there on the West Coast. It could be a calm day and you're still like, "Wow, Mother Nature is still able to kick my ass." It's just it like I have tingles. Like it's amazing. Um, so, I wonder why we don't feel that so much in Southern Ontario. And I guess the lack of mountains, the lack of, fetch over the ocean to create that swell, et cetera. We don't have salt water smell. All of that is not there. But here we are. But it's a much more settled landscape, right? So it's farmed. It is flat. A lot of Southern Ontario anyway. And I think that people actually see nature as more of a subset of our human culture than in BC, where it's like, okay, there's nature and there are cougars, mountain lions, and bears, like right there. And, when it floods, like it floods. And it's, it's, I can see how you would have a bit more reverence for nature in BC than in Ontario. But one of the things that I always thought was very interesting, I'd had a little stint as a teacher, professor at Georgian College, and also at York University as a graduate assistant. And most of the students that I had in those two contexts grew up not in the city of Toronto, which I grew up pretty close to downtown, like right in Toronto proper. Um, and they were just like, oh no, we don't like downtown. The streets are narrow and it's busy and therefore we don't like it. And I was like, but you love where you live. Like, what is so great about it? And I realize that if you are brought up in suburban environment, it actually can be kind of uncomfortable and challenging to see the landscape, even our urban landscape, in a different way. And I think that's really the challenge of our time. Like I just saw, an article in Bradford today because I always scan our local news in the morning, and they're putting up a 2-story duplex. Oh my God. Like the sky is falling. People are like, what? It's going to ruin our neighborhood. Like, it is not going to ruin your neighborhood. It's really not. Like, if we are still arguing about things like this is what makes me sad. Because we have a housing crisis in Ontario. What we need is cheaper housing. General average people cannot afford the average cost of a single family detached home. It's more than $1 million. Like, we need to build the housing people can afford, period. And it's too bad if it doesn't look exactly like what you grew up in. But like that's the challenge for Ontario right now. And these things affect the environment. And I'll just explain a little bit because maybe someone doesn't know. When you rip up the land and then you have a pile of dirt in it and it gets whipped up by the wind and it gets rained on, all of that erosion, whether by air or by water, it all ends up in a water body. And the dirt contains phosphorus and nutrients, and they contribute to The excess weed growth and the phosphorus pollution of Lake Simcoe, which is its main problem.
Mhm.
Which
Mm.
is a complex topic. But long story short, all of the development that we're seeing and the proliferation of suburbs, the continued proliferation of suburbs, is adding to the pollution of Lake Simcoe. So if we want a healthy Lake Simcoe, we need to also accept some more density. And I'm telling you that like a two-story building in a community of bungalows, like that's what I live in, where I live in Toronto. It's like pretty much all bungalows. I live in a bungalow, but there are two-story houses on either side of me. Oh well, I'm not moving.
Can I
Mhm.
just touch on a few things there? One, I think you're both right, like the idea of how Ontario views its nature. And I think what's kind of been built into the collective consciousness from my perspective is that Ontario for a really long time was known as the economic engine of Canada. You know, if you wanted a job, you had to go to the city. Toronto was the thing. That's where the economy boomed. And unlike other provinces in Canada that didn't have the economy to make it a thing, I think a lot of Ontarians, at least until recent days, older generations, if you will, thought of Ontario as like the place where you get jobs and you make money. And I think that's still running in how governments talk to people. You know, like we got to build, we got to get our economy where like there's this heyday of manufacturing that we've kind of is now long expired,
Yeah.
but I think it's still there in our collective memory for those that are old enough to remember it. And so it's really easy, I think, for the province to tap into this idea of like, you know, we need to get things going, we need to get building, you know, we need to get our economy going again because we're like, yes, we were the economic powerhouse. Whereas, you know, some of your the coastal provinces, you know, the Maritimes, they didn't have that moniker. They started to think about other things, right? And I also think that when people respond, so we're getting this like big housing push, right? Because got to build Ontario back to the economic powerhouse that it was, and people come to know that first. Unlike BC, as you're both saying, that nature is kind of prevalent, you can't really escape it. That's its first identity. But I think that the reason why people are afraid of density, part of the reason at least, is because generally we don't actually build very attractive communities in Ontario. There's really not like they build density without trees, without parks, without landscapes. It just again almost mirrors that Ontario image of like we are functional, not beautiful. You
Yeah.
know, our economy's functional, our province is functional because we get the stuff done, we get the jobs, we do whatever. We're not worried about the beauty because it's the function before form, right? And so I think that some people are just used to seeing ugly communities. And so the developers try to do this really nice facade, perhaps, but it's still ugly because there's no nature there and people aren't really connecting it. And I've heard from a lot of people that are like, not that I think duplexes are going to ruin it. I agree with you. I think that you need density, but generally it ends up how whether we do sprawl or whether we do dense communities, they all end up generally pretty ugly, all mostly concrete, you know, not a lot of nature, not a lot of green spaces. And what we do know in Ontario after COVID was that most of the people that had access to nature were not living in suburbs, were not living in dense areas. They were living in like, you know, rural estate kind of places. That's where most of the nature is. So I think that the planners and the cities and the municipalities have to take a little bit of responsibility for how do we actually build communities that are still accessible to green space so that when someone goes, we have to build, we have to densify within this place, we're not going to just rip out all the forests, we're not going to rip out all the things that are beautiful about it. And I think there's a healthy amount of distrust that's been earned. And I don't think the province is helping with the policies that it's putting in about, you know, not no park space, you know, for certain developments. Like those sort of things um, just reinforce this idea that Ontarians get to expect you're
Mhm.
going to have a functional life, but it's not actually that functional and it's definitely not that beautiful. And you're going to have to drive somewhere to get that sense of awe.
Yeah, and let alone, I mean, I think, a sense of awe and loving nature. I agree. It's really important for people to have access. It's really important for people to ask their councils to do this because that's all we really have left. I mean, there's a little story of sort of an activity, a success, and a failure to answer three of the questions that you sent me, Adam.
Mhm.
that kind of tells a good story of kind of what it's been like over the last 7 years. And you guys were involved with creating a map. We worked with a cartographer from the University of Guelph at the time, Kirby Calvert, to map the extent of policy protection for wetlands and forests in Simcoe County and across the Lake Simcoe watershed. And then we kind of toured with that work and we went to councils and it was really effective. And I think that is the kind of work that these organizations, as you guys are now doing so much of this mapping work, I think it's really important and effective to help remind people, well, here we are on the landscape and this is what it looks like from a policy perspective. This is what's protected. Do you think that's enough? So we worked on that to kind of set the table and say, well, gee, guys, like there's a lot of nature here, but it's not well enough protected. So let's do that. And I don't know, I guess I thought the government would do that. And then the way we thought they were going to do that was by applying a natural heritage policy for the province in Southern Ontario. And then they produced these horrible, unusable maps. And then they were like, here you go, counties, consult with your lower tier municipalities. Good luck. I don't know how you're going to match this map with the mapping you have. But anyway, so all the municipalities and our organization in particular did a lot of nitpicking at these areas. Why isn't this included in your natural heritage system that would get a higher level of protection? What about this? This is right beside a park. Why not bump that corner out? Like, there are all these sloppy details that everyone's like, nature, schmature, whatever. So, or they just did a rush job. I'm not trying to criticize the staff involved here, actually, but it was a rush job. And maybe they knew the end of the story, which was that the province actually just said, forget it. And they got rid of the whole thing along with the growth plan.
And the agricultural system
Southern
too.
Ontario. Yeah, no agricultural system, no natural heritage system, no growth plan.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm shocked that is what happened, but it's pretty dispiriting when you've put in an enormous amount of time and energy and very good research, very careful work, and they're like, no thanks. But then they're like, hey, free fishing on Father's Day, and hey, we're adding a park. And it's like, you can't save water and fish by just creating little parks here and there. You need connected natural heritage systems. And they've said no to that. Mm-hmm. So that is very alarming. Like, anyway, that is one of those stories of what happened in my tenure. And, where do you go from here? I guess we have to go to our municipal councils and say, wait a minute, again, this is in the environmental protection area, which doesn't really have very strong protection, but, can you stop doing that? And, in Innisfil, for example, I just applied to be on their environment committee. I was denied, even though I told them that I was stepping down as the ED here. And, I'm sure there's some good people on the committee. One of those people is Marvin Geist, who has helped a number of people remove their forested properties from the environmental protection category and have them turned into subdivisions. So I'm just like, how cynical is all of this? Like, you've got a developer on your environment committee and you have one of the best known environmentalists not on your committee. Like, who's the bad guy? I don't know. I don't think I'm a bad guy. I tried to live a good life.
Yeah. I mean, it does speak to, I think, how we view the environment here. And I'm constantly also thinking of this juxtaposition with BC. And I may have given the perception that things are like peachier than they actually are in BC with respect to like environmental policy and things like that. Because I mean, one of the things that you'll experience out there is clear cuts. At least if you look, what's the buffer typically on the side of the road? The buffer is usually just enough so that you can't see the clear cut. But if you go like 10 meters off the side of the road, often you'll see nothing but cut down forest space. But that can regrow, and often it's also in areas that aren't suitable for building on.
Yes.
And I think it's just an interesting comparison, I think, to think about how also urban planning occurs in BC versus Ontario, like one of the best advocates for livable communities, Brett Todarian, is out of Vancouver, and Vancouver is also widely recognized as one of the most livable, walkable, complete communities. That's not to say that it's affordable, but it has these natural constraints on where it's
Yeah.
able to expand and where you're able to build around it. And so the analogy in Ontario for that is largely missing, except for when it is placed into regulation. And so where the boundaries of that built up area are established. Why? Like, what's the process behind that? The justification for putting development in this particular location, things like that, and how it fits with other locations and with services and transportation, all these different interlocking systems that are really important in a complex society like what we have. And as you just described, our current government has pretty much done away with all of that. So
Mhm.
we have this sort of flat landscape, roughly, where you can, by and large, kind of build pretty much wherever if you own the land and you have some decent relationships with local decision makers. And just so, like, as far as this contrast between this person who's on the environmental advisory committee, who seems to view the environment as something that is there to be in that utilitarian sense, or in a more sort of narrow utilitarian sense. I think all of us would acknowledge that the environment provides services that are useful for us in terms of air purification, water filtration, things like that, but not necessarily for development, helter skelter kind of. But so flipping back to BC, that view would be the timber view, right? But you're just not able to build there. Here, it's like a lot of development is land banking. You're buying land, and then you're sort of vying for how you can get. So you're buying land on the cheap when it is not actually sort of developable, and then you're sort of vying in the policy arena to get it to be something that can be developable. Often it's then sold to other developers, and whoever bought it initially makes bank, or just the developer has already sort of land banked it and has turned this handsome profit once it becomes much easier to develop. So I think it's like development in Ontario is kind of like our forestry industry in some
Oh yeah.
respects, right? So
Yeah.
like the land that's developable is viewed as sort of that raw natural resource to be sort of controlled and exploited. And but the problem there is we don't have any natural constraints in place, which is what the usefulness of the regulatory regime and the growth plan was.
Yeah, exactly. No, no, I think that's quite right. I mean, I remember being kind of shocked in BC to learn that they had an agricultural land preserve, ALP, and it's like, wow, that's a really good idea. And I think part of the reason that they had that, it wasn't perfect, but was because, like in the Fraser Valley in particular, this is incredibly good farmland, and you
Hmm.
just can't pave over it. Those constraints are there. I
Hmm.
mean, I think the farm community in Ontario has been doing a pretty good job of being transparent with government and on social media and in the news, saying, we're losing like 350 acres a day or something of farmland now
Hmm.
in Southern Ontario, and it is a finite resource. So it is. I think we need to ask people to expand their minds a little bit more and think like, well, where it's not true that we can just farm up in Muskoka, guys. Like the
Mhm.
soil is really bad.
Mhm.
So we can't just say, oh, climate change is going to mean that you can farm in new places. Good for them. Like we need to protect the farmland that we have. Uh,
Mhm.
and yeah, and like some interesting government research from within the last 10 years, like the size of the farms gets bigger and the numbered companies that own the farms grows. So, it is viewed as an investment. And I think we're really going to harm ourselves. If you just pictured your body or your children as investment opportunities, like things wouldn't go so well. I don't think in your relationships with your children or with your body. And so I think we maybe just need to think about the land a bit more that way. We need some land for farming. We need some land for forests and nature. We need some land for housing, but we it's just a bit too bad to see all of the opposition to the housing that people can afford. It's going to be smaller, it's going to be more dense. We have a labor shortage. But we also right now have federal money that is going to be coming for this kind of housing stock. So I just think it's a really important priority right now for people to recognize that we're not actually sacrificing anything by building the housing that we need and that people can afford and that the government can afford to build. And in fact, we probably will be saving something in that if it's more dense housing, you're not building on farmland, you're not building in a wetland or a forest like around Lefroy
Mhm.
in Innisfil, where we've lost lots of forests to development.
Yeah.
The hard part is, though, is that, like, going back to what you were saying earlier and what Adam was kind of building on, is that I don't think that there's much discipline in planning in Ontario. And if people have joked that Ontario's policy is just three developers in a trench coat. Um, and I would say that, like, I look at it, that kind of aspect, is almost like if you had a 3-year-old. Children developmentally are very self-interested when they're young, right? That is a part of their psychological growing up and maturity. They're self-interested. And so, you wouldn't sit your kid down with all you can eat buffet, or at least most people wouldn't, of, marshmallows and their favorite candy and their juice, and just say, just go wild, because they're so self-interested. There's no discipline, there's no boundaries, until they make themselves so sick that you're cleaning up puke for the rest of the night. But what we have done in Ontario is removed any discipline that people want to call red tape. There, because we don't have those natural features like you guys are talking about. What is the end game? When do we say this is enough, or this is the boundary? And so the natural heritage systems and the agricultural system mapping, like, I want to underscore to people, what that was going to do was going to give all of the bodies, from conservation authorities to the province to the municipalities to regions, a map. And with that map were protective policies. Many of the natural heritage systems mapping was from the Greenbelt. So there were Greenbelt like protections that were going to say, here's where our natural heritage is, here's where our agricultural system is. We're not going to mess with this, and we're going to do it in proper places. So all of the discipline that we would need to not mess up the things that we can't mess up, the Endangered Species Act, so, like, it just goes on and on and on in this whole deregulation. And the only thing we really have left that provides any sort of discipline now with planning, I see it, is the Lakes and Protection Plan, to a degree, and also the Greenbelt to a degree. And those are actively being undermined. So, when people think about how planning policy is done in Ontario, I think you should just imagine, would you give your kid a bowl of marshmallows and just tell them to eat as much as they want? And right now, there's no guardrails. There's no guardrails in it. We're just allowing them to say, just take what you want. And talking to counselors across Simcoe County, um, they're saying, like, look, we've approved so much housing, it's not getting built. And we can't control when it gets built, because we give them all of the approvals. Then they sit on it until it's ready to be marketable, until, like, it can be profitable. And then we still have a housing shortage. So then we try somewhere else. And you start to get into these things where, I think it was Oakville, I'm going to say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you guys might remember better, but they said they had close to like 400,000 units already approved that haven't been built, that developers have just been sitting on. So this whole idea of land banking, it's more than just like, oh, we want to build and we can't build. No, you can build. We already know that there's enough housing supply already approved in the pipe. That's from the province. It's just not getting built, and that's not the municipality's fault or the conservation authority's fault. That's the developers waiting for the time when it's profitable. Just like your kids are going to sneak candy when you're not looking, right? Like, they're just waiting for their opportunity. It has nothing to do with them wanting to be, for the most part, good corporate citizens or providing a product. Maybe
Or
I'm
providing what's needed. Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, the growth plan in which the government of Ontario has tossed to the curb
an
required
award-winning plan, by the way.
award winning,
Yeah.
like across North America, won an award for a great way to manage growth and build efficiently. Like it wasn't just like I don't know who's watching this, but I mean, there's no WEF involved here, right? Like it's not like there's some United Nations power saying
Oh,
you're going to make a growth plan so that you can control people in these little towns. Like no, it was how do we build what we can afford?
Mm-hmm.
So, and how do we build what is needed? So,
Mm-hmm.
before expanding the settlement area, the area that you're allowed to build in, it used to be under the growth plan that the municipality, with the working with the upper tier, like the region or the county, had to say, well, we don't have enough of this in our housing mix, and we've used up all the land that we have approved for housing, and so therefore we need to expand our boundary. You needed to be able to justify that.
Mm-hmm.
And that might sound like red tape and really boring to some people, but here's the problem. When you don't have that, you have what Margaret just described, approval, like ready to build, but they're just waiting for the magical time when the 3,000 square foot homes are going to become affordable for enough people again.
Mm-hmm.
So that is really dangerous for a whole lot of reasons. So like this is actually pretty sure this is going to fall apart and collapse, and we'll have to go back to some rational planning because this cannot work.
Mm-hmm.
So like the government of Ontario is saying, well, let's get rid of development cost charges. Those are the things that are used to make your house, your everything outside of your house. Like, they go into schools and community facilities and parks and trails. Okay, if you don't have development cost charges, who pays for those things? And how do we make sure they get built? Because your life is more than just your house, right? So there's a lack of funding. And then if they just sprawl, then you need to run new pipes to all these places. And who pays for that? And if you don't have the money for that, you can't build that. So I don't know, like I think the Ontario government seems to be playing roulette with the federal government saying, look, we have all this stuff approved. Now fund the infrastructure. And it's like, well, wait a minute. The development community, which is a for-profit sector, like
Special interest.
they used to fund or be part of funding this infrastructure, and we've let them not do that anymore because that was what red tape. Like it's literally the pipes.
mhm.
It's like this is not red tape. This is essential stuff for the development. So frankly, I mean, we spent so long reviewing official plans, doing all this really detailed policy planning work. They blew up everything that we were commenting on. Like it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a freaking disaster. Like there's no way that what has been approved in Ontario is going to be built on the timeline that people need to be housed. I think we can only really look to the federal government working really quickly on prefab, modular, I don't know, but we need to build a lot of affordable housing so that the price of housing for everybody can start to settle down in Ontario. Because what the Ontario government has got planned is just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got about 10 minutes to go here, and I want to ask, curious about your experience in grassroots organizing and environmental advocacy, and sort of what, how, how that's changed from when you started with Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition here to now.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, I would go back further to I started working at Environmental Defense running Campaign Lake Simcoe in 2006, I think, maybe 2007. So until that point, I hadn't been much involved in organizing. I mean, I remember my boss said, "What do you know about organizing?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty organized. Like, I'm an organized person." So it was pretty new to me, and I have to say it was the fight for the green belt that made me go, "Wow, look at what people can do. This is amazing." And it was really a huge relief to me after just driving past the proliferation of suburbs and wondering what was going on and where this was going to stop. The fight for the Greenbelt was really inspiring. It was an amazing collaboration of people in government or opposition. And
In
we,
2010, I'll just interject. We're not talking about the recent fights for the Greenbelt. We're talking about when it got first established
yeah,
in
2005.
2005. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was pretty exciting. And I think also at the time there was a lot of belief that kind of if you organize it, they will come, and that was fairly true with some really good organizing. There was not a lot of social media way back then, and I remember people being like, "Oh, I have to tweet," and that was not how we were communicating. We were communicating through newsletters on our Lake Simcoe campaign. We were engaging people of all stripes, but we had really strong interest and engagement from, well-heeled professionals who didn't necessarily see themselves as environmentalists, but they wanted to make Lake Simcoe better. They wanted to make the world a better place. They thought they had something to give. Um, and so I think, the beginning for me was really, really inspiring. And we got the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and plan. And that process was not grassroots, but oh, sorry, what happened after was not grassroots. So I just want to kind of acknowledge the pivot. So it went from this big campaign with lots and lots of public support, the involvement of the Ladies of the Lake, Ontario Nature, Environmental Defense, everybody's saying I love Lake Simcoe, all parties agreeing. I mean, it's just like, wow, all parties agreed. Like, when has that happened in the last 7 years? Like, come on, like, agreeing is good. I wish they would agree sometimes. Anyway, so it felt pretty great. And then when the government was creating the regulation, a lot of stuff for me anyway, it went into a bit of a black box, but I was in that box. I was part of the policy network and working with government and multi-stakeholder, recreation, First Nations, municipal, fishing, tourism, like all those players were together creating the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan together. I think that was a really effective process, and I think we got a good product, maybe not perfect, but a good product with the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. But then what happens, and this is a bit of a lesson for grassroots organizing, I think, and for governments, referencing also the failure of the carbon tax, the federal carbon tax, like where people are blocked out, where the real work is it's unclear what it is or what's happening to the general public, or when those meetings, for example, they were confidential. It was like, what can we say? Like, what can we say about what's happening? That really takes the wind out of the sails of grassroots activism. And I think that part of what's happened at Lake Simcoe was, and I'm sure we were part of the problem too, is to say, well, fantastic, we got this legislation, we're good to go. And, the new government said, we will enforce and we will implement and we will continue the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. And they continue to say that, but they also chip away at stuff. And again, it's very black box. Like, I am currently trying to evaluate, like, 2009 to 15 era to where we're at now. And it's really hard to find information. Like the fish health one, I'm like, I don't know. I think it's worse, but anyway. So I do think I think it's important that, grassroots, at least at this point, focus more grassroots, actually. The province is clearly not listening. And so I think we need to really get our act together at the local level to say, along with our municipal counterparts, we want this, this, and this. Like, we have to be telling them, I think, with one voice that is what we want. And, therefore, it's also really important that people think about the municipal election and who they're electing and what values they bring. Because it's quite dangerous, I think, when everything goes into this sort of confusing policy wonky thing. I mean, that's what Ontario has done the last 7 years, is they have just hammered away and chipped away at so much legislation that the people that typically respond thoughtfully, like myself, with research, we're just like, I have no idea how you even think this would work. Like, what am I supposed to say? This is nuts. Send. Like, what do you say? They're not reading what you write anyway.
Yeah.
So, it's become difficult as a thoughtful person who likes to provide meaningful input to government to not just write ridiculous things like this is nuts, because what they're proposing is equally nuts and impossible to follow, as it's just chipping away. And if I'd like to just give one example.
Yeah.
So the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan allows for the Conservation Authority to collect some money for phosphorus offset. Developers can pay into a fund, or they can minimize their pollution on site or the flooding that's generated from their development on site. I wonder if that piece is going to survive, because Ontario has just said you're not allowed to have green building standards. Is that a green building? Is that going to be lumped in with green building? So they didn't come out and say, Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, we're gutting you, but they chipped away at a related thing that, without mentioning Lake Simcoe, I don't know. Is that going to survive?
Is there?
There's other like site specific stuff that really has to do with green development, because that's what we need at Lake Simcoe.
Yeah.
We need green development, and everybody agreed to that 8 years ago. So like, why not now?
Okay, so we're bumping up against the edge of our time here. So we have 3 questions that we ask all of our guests. And so the first is, what advice would you give a young person who wants to make a difference?
I would say just jump in. Jump into learning about something that you're interested in. And if you've done a little digging and you're still really interested, then hopefully along the way you've found organizations that are doing similar work. And whether you want to join them or whether you want to like focus all your school research projects on this topic, like you can do that. Like, school is an amazing opportunity to study what you want within the confines of this exercise. So I think always be, and I did this myself, it's how I launched my career, was an independent study. So always be looking at those opportunities, and also like get off social media and just engage with your community. Like, go out there and be a scout leader, or be a swim instructor or whatever. Like, just get off the social media and go
I
for
think
it.
that's useful advice for everyone in all walks of life
That is
at
true.
all times. It's like the plague of our modern times. Okay. Question number 2. How do you think about failure, and how do you respond when it happens?
Well, this is a challenge. I do feel like the environmental sector is failing in Ontario, and I'm really sorry. I feel really bad about it. So that's part of my answer. But also, I think we have to, make sure we don't put the weight of the world on individuals' shoulders. I mean, we've been spending all this time talking about the systems that the government is breaking, and we are human beings that live here too, with children and aging parents and like all the things. So, you're human, I'm human. We're going to fail sometimes, but it doesn't mean that it's over. Like, it just means that a different tactic is needed, and or maybe a different topic is needed. Come back later.
Yeah. Okay, and the last one. What's your greatest fear for Ontario and your greatest hope?
My greatest fear for Ontario is that Ontarians elect this provincial government again, because it's not going well on any count. My greatest hope is that we can learn from the situation and say, well, we tore everything apart and it didn't make anyone's lives better or cheaper or get anyone anywhere faster. So maybe we should go back to evidence-based decision making.
Crazy, outrageous.
I know, what a radical.
Scandalous.
Yeah.
So radical.
Well, any closing quick remarks there, Margaret? And no?
No, I just, Claire, well, yes, I do actually. Uh, when Claire did her Laugh for Lake Simcoe, which I don't know if we're going to do, she did a nice little ode to SCGC and us. And I know this isn't really your farewell, Claire, but in an official capacity where lots of people are watching, hopefully thousands of people all over the globe watching this podcast. I just want to say how much it's been a wonderful experience getting to know you, watching you organize, learning from you, having you as a sister organization, even though we're not directly affiliated, but we worked really closely on things. And I think um, people should be very proud of the work that you did. And I'm trying not to get choked up here a little bit because I'm like feeling, because I care about you a whole deal and you've done a lot of really great things. So people should be very proud of the work that you've done and the work that Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition has done. And if you care about the lake, then you need to help make sure that organizations like yours and ours continue. And just, you've done really well, kid.
Thanks so
Good.
much. I appreciate it. It's been really a pleasure and an honor to do the work. And I'm not dead, and I'm not going to go. It's
Your little eulogy there, your environmental
so
eulogy.
yeah, no. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, and thank you everyone for tuning in. As usual, our little sort of request, if you appreciate this podcast, if you found it useful, leave a rating on whatever platform you use. I guess that makes it much easier for other people to find, bumps it up their algorithm or something like that. I don't know. Ghost in the shell, right? And otherwise, we will be back next week, or I will be back. Margaret will be in Portugal.
Tough life.
Yeah. I will be back next week, and I'm going to look for a co host. I've got a couple in mind that I'm going to ask, but I will be back with former Premier of Ontario, the Honorable Kathleen Wynne, next Tuesday at 11 a.m. And for now, thanks a lot. Thanks again, Claire, and we'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. Thank
And
you too.
okay, bye,
All right.
guys.
Bye.